Good space time, y'all. In this episode of the Citizen Cosmos podcast, I speak to Zarko Milosevic, CTO at Informal Systems, a core developer of everything Cosmos. Zarko makes two big announcements revealing Quint, a Tilly Plus inspired specification language for blockchain protocols, and the updates and news around Informal's work on the Tendermint code base. We also discussed Informal's vision, the governance in Cosmos, verification tools and their importance, advanced indexing, and scalability issues.
It's like the programming language, but with some kind of nice superpowers.
I'm gonna tell you guys a secret straight away. Listen to this episode.
That's one of the things which we have sort of exclusive announcement to make here in this episode. It was clear for us, like from the beginning, that doesn't make sense to separate the two. They need to coexist with each other and be in love.
I hope that the new consensus engine, let's call it like that, can handle more drama per second. Before we rock it off into today's podcast, here is a roundup of the latest news from the sponsor of this episode, Cyber. The Cyber Congress DAO has been primarily working on improving the Bostrom hub. This work includes testing of the contracts, new UI features, verification tools for on-chain governance, and polishing the Bostrom DEX, adding MEF protection, new web front, and bringing indexing of chain swaps. To try Bostrom, head now to oversib.ai. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Cosmos podcast. Today, I have back with me, because the last time we recorded was actually 2 years ago, Zarko, the CTO of Informal Systems. And I'm going to tell you guys a secret straight away. Listen to this episode. This is going to be a really good one. So, Zarko, hi. Welcome back.
Yeah, hi. No pressure. So,
No pressure. No pressure. I'm sorry.
Okay, no pressure. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. It has been quite some time, and a lot of things happen in the meantime. And I'm really happy to chat with you about this and whatever
else comes. But before we go into it, Zarko, first thing is first. Considering it's been a while and we have new listeners, I hope. Would you mind reintroducing yourself a little bit more than just the CTO of Informal, and tell me and everybody else about what you're working on and what is your role a little bit more in Informal and everything else you want to add to that?
So yeah, I'm still Zarko Milosevic. That hasn't changed. Last time we talked, I think I was still a researcher. So my kind of technical background is in distributed systems. I did my PhD thesis at TPFL in Switzerland, actually in the area of Byzantine fault tolerant consensus protocols. This was before Cosmos, and I'm not sure we can say really before crypto, but clearly it was before consensus use in the production system at this scale. And so I'm really happy that I was sort of given a chance to have some follow-up on that research in a kind of real world. So my current role at Informal is CTO, so I'm overseeing technical work at Informal. Informal is doing a lot of stuff. So I'm more trying to catch up with all the stuff we are doing, but still in Cosmos, still trying to help with the public goods infrastructure, still trying to improve the security of the systems we build and rely on, trying also to help with Informal on the business side, creating a sustainable business, and also offering interesting services and building cool products for other people.
You make it sound so simple. I like it. So before we go into the cool stuff, I guess, just some general chit chat, considering that Informal works a lot on, as far as I know, on work ethics and work structures. I'm curious whether Informal is still bound to all the same end of the year trouble as all the other projects in the world are. Because I know we tried to meet and you were saying, oh, there was loads of things end of the year. And I was like, but you guys need have cool structures. I know that. So to be honest, the question is more about how is that thing progressing? I know we talked about it with you. We talked about it with Bucky. We talked about it with Yelena, about that you guys are trying to work a lot in that direction. And I know it's not your topic, of course, but in 2 words, is that something that touches your work? Is that something that influences you?
Yeah, I was kind of involved. So Informal has grown pretty significantly in the course of last year. And since we discussed last time, so we're around 60 people now. And they're having also some change in terms of the responsibility of Informal in Cosmos. So since last year, we took the responsibility of being steward for Tendermint core repository. and also for Cosmos Hub, in addition to like the work we're doing on IBC. And also like what has happened in the last quarter, which sort of like made the end of the year a bit like turbulent, was creation of TAB, Technical Advisory Board at ICF, where I'm a member. And ICF is trying to put more structure in the way the work on the core infrastructure or public goods is being organized and funded. And so this was sort of like a new structure. And as Informal is the biggest contributor to the Cosmos public goods projects, we were of course like affected by this change. And so it just took some time to like put things in place. Apart from this, like we are still, how to say, we are cooperative. We are still focusing on our members and delivering value to them, and also like trying to play ethically nice to people around us. We're also trying to build in parallel with work on public goods. We are trying to build, as I said, like sustainable business, and there are several business verticals within Informal. Just like taking care of like this different concerns is challenging, and that's why like end of the year where we are summing up and making plans and budgets for the next year is always a bit challenging. So
I'm just checking that you're still human. This is all. It was just like the. No, I'm joking.
no, we suffer, we cry like humans, stuff like yeah, absolutely.
Last, and considering what you just mentioned about the creation of a technical board where you're part of it, you mentioned some business verticals. And last time, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll be honest, I did have a look, of course, I couldn't remember everything, but we chatted a lot at the end about personal values, the alignment of personal values and company goals. And I'm curious whether the changes that have been, well, to your own position, and I know that it's just a title, but at the end of the day, I think for somebody who does the work that you do, those things could be important. Well, at least it is like that for me. And you mentioned a lot of things, and I'm still curious whether until today, those alignments with the values and that you have and the goals that Informal have are still in the same place, and whether you feel that what you're doing corresponds to those values.
I haven't really checked what we talked last time. So I can just say then from like where I stand right now, values are still there. In terms of like the company mission and vision, I think like that we managed to like even solidify things even more. So we are, I would say, even more ambitious. So like the current way we phrase what you're doing at Informal is trying to transform the three major pillars of society. If you talk recently with Bucky, maybe he said this, but like it's money, software, and organizations. And so this is also related with like the business verticals we are doing. So there is like a project on collaborative finance, which we are bootstrapping at Informal. So that fits into the money side. On the software side, we probably talked last time about like the work we're doing on the formal verification tooling and in general, like the security tooling and improvements that's related with like the software. We believe that the way we develop critical distributed systems is suboptimal, and we believe that we have something to say on that front. And on the org side, like we are co-op and we are trying to innovate like in-house how we govern organizations, and also like are trying to participate in the hub governance in general, in Cosmos governance, and trying to sort of lead by an example there. There is the methodology we're using for collaboration called workflow, and it's on our website. Some people might be reading about this. So that's just one element of it, but that's sort of the plan. So in terms of like the core values, I hope that this sounds like similar to what we discussed last time, but maybe just like packaged in a more structured way.
Last time you were talking about Lambos. No, I'm joking. No, of course not. I don't know. For me, I'm going to be honest with you because, like, the reason I'm asking, and it was a personal thing, because for me, for example, even though I still work a lot with the same projects, I kind of like separated myself from a few projects because over the course of 2 years, my values and their goals kind of separated. So I was curious whether you're still there, and you are, and I'm really glad to hear that. And you mentioned straight away formal verifications. And this was a big topic. We talked about assurance audits, formal verifications. And you mentioned on Twitter verification tools. And I would be very curious to hear, and I'm sure everybody else who's listening would be very curious to hear about what type of tooling in that direction you've been working on, and what is the progress that has been happening in those years, and what new things there are.
Yeah, so that's one of the things which we have sort of exclusive announcement to make here in this episode. So this year we were like the verification tools at Informal were working hard, and we at the end of the year, I think in the last days of last year, we like open sourced and released verification specification language called Quint, which is like one element of the tool chain we were building last years. But Quint is important because the challenges of verification tools, in our view and our experience, are mostly on like adoption and developer friendliness side of the thing. We were lucky to have like some really amazing people and experts in verification, form verification of distributed systems. And they were able to demonstrate over years that they can bring value with their methodologies and tools. But we were not really able to scale that beyond a small group of people with like that formal training. And this is, in our view, also like the challenge with like most of the existing tools out there. There is like a trend in the last year of like trying to like address this issue, and there are several other projects which are sort of having like very similar objectives. So if you listen to the intro talk of like several really strong, verification groups or like companies, the first 5-10 minutes are almost the same. What differ is the way different teams are approaching these challenges. It's always about making like tools more developer friendly, making it more efficient, making it more flexible, making it more like kind of domain specific. And so what essentially we have to offer on that front is Quint, which is a new specification language. It is inspired by TLA Plus. So like TLA Plus was like our starting point, and like we have been developing for years model checker called Appalachi, which is symbolic model checker for TLA Plus, and we have been using it like in our projects successfully. But the challenge with TLA Plus was that it was like having very steep the learning curve, and it was very different like experience working with like TLA Plus compared to like modern programming languages. And Quint is trying to address this. So Quint has like syntax, which is like very similar to modern programming languages like Scala or Rust. It has CLI, so interactive REPL, which you can use to like explore the specification of the protocol. It can be executed. So it's like the programming language, but with some kind of nice superpowers. It has a built-in simulator, and it is integrated to the Appalachi as a model checker. And so you have now possibility to, it's a fully type checked. So it has like VS Code plugin also. So it's really like the feeling of working with Quint when you design protocol is like you're writing your program. You have all nice features developers are expecting. And in addition to this, then you can choose also like how far you want to go in terms of like guarantees. You can check the invariants and properties using built-in simulator, which is super fast, but like does not have like the strong guarantees. There is a second mode, which is simulation using Appalachi, which is a bit solid in terms of coverage and a bit faster. And then the full model checking is kind of the last element. And then also like the challenge with TLA Plus was that feedback loop was pretty long. And now you can sort of like use the tool in real time using like simulation mode and Appalachi simulation mode. And then you can leave the full model checking maybe to run as part of continuous integration. And so that's sort of like kind of one of the main value proposition for Quint. There are some other stuff, but maybe we can pause here, and then there are a few other stuff we were developing in the tool chain, but maybe we can stop here so I give you a chance to ask question about Quint.
No, I'm making notes, of course, as you speak, but thank you. That is something I was going to ask for. My first question was whether Quint is already released on, if is it on GitHub already? Can you go and use it already?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Informal Systems on GitHub/Quint, and it's already there. We are working on documentation tutorials, And that's the main focus. There is already something there, so I hope that people are already able to go there, download, try the stuff. There are like a set of examples, but in the Q1 the plan is to improve the onboarding material, and we are also working with some core Cosmos teams to sort of like try to replace the existing specifications with Quint, and also like then to try to connect this with like the model-based testing tools we're also developing parallel. So the idea here is like that. So if you look at, for example, Tendermint or IBC specs, normally the way we were writing specs is like there is some English description to give like a reader feeling of what the protocol is about. And we were then normally trying to capture, to write like some, in good specs, we write like properties which hold, and we write like a pseudocode to like give reader or engineer who is like trying to implement the protocol idea how like this should work, like what are the basic mechanics. So I always have like these two elements, like the invariants which should hold, and like the pseudocode which sort of like shows how things should work. What with Quint we want to do is like we want to replace this, and this is just like English. So the pseudocode is something which cannot be sanity checked, it cannot be type checked, it cannot be executed. It normally gets like very fast out of date, no matter how developers are eager to keep it up to date. After there is a reference implementation becomes source of truth. And this is particularly challenging when we are starting to have like implementations in multiple languages or frameworks. And also for onboarding, it's always like challenging because like you give engineers something and then they say like, yeah, but implementation is slightly different. So what we want to do instead is to try out to replace the pseudocode, which is essentially like English, with Quint, as our hypothesis here is that like the learning curve for Quint will be like very low, as that's something people are get used to. And so writing like the logic in Quint should be like similar compared to the pseudocode, but then you have like a full tooling support on top of this. So you can make sure that it's indeed like works. Invariants will be also captured in Quint, so you can like check that your spec is sane, like there are no like issues with it. And then with like the other tooling we were developing, you can generate like what we call model-based tests, which are essentially scenarios which are trying to exercise the core invariants. And they are like expressed in the abstract form, in a form of like traces. There is like, we have like the format in informal called informal ITF, I think, which is like essentially JSON. And that's something then different implementations can use almost as a set of like base tests the protocol should implement. And it's language agnostic. And so like if you have implementation of IBC in Go or Rust or whatever, then you can have like some basic set of like tests we should pass. So you can be considered, implementing at least like a bare minimum of implementing protocol.
I guess so. Like one thing that comes to mind, and it's kind of silly, but I cannot not help to say that because it just springs to mind. And I mean, over the past years of working not just with blockchains, but generally with anything that requires a certain level of verifiability or auditability. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those words correctly. Never mind. There is always a kind of, I don't know, like developers don't like to be verified. Developers like to think, a lot of developers, they hate that. Like from my experience, like, oh, I'm going to be using that's going to verify me. No way. I'm going to be using what I know. Is that an obstacle that you guys have been like thinking about, keeping in the back of the head? Because I know that this is amazing, right? But like maybe, some people just like, oh, I don't need that. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm going to be doing and I don't care about verifications.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really the main driver for this work, because like that was exactly what was happening with like the TLA Plus and the original set of tools. Just like everyone, like, and to be frank, there, like people hated this, and so they were not, although they were able to appreciate the values, just the cost of learning and using tools was so high that they were not able, and also maintaining it after. It's a very valid concern, and that's something we're trying to address. So the way how we are currently working on adoption at Informal is that Informal is like offering security audit or partnership services. We are currently primarily focusing on Cosmos and exclusively working on Cosmos project at the moment to help them be more secure and correct. And there we have like the model we like most is the partnership model, which is like a long-term collaboration where we have like a dedicated bandwidth to work with the core teams, trying to be almost like, embedded in a core teams, and then trying to like understand and listen their needs and then bring our expertise and knowledge to address the real concern. That's like a super helpful validation point for us, and also like a playground to see like what works, what doesn't work. That's sort of like, I would say, the primer adoption vehicle right now. We haven't like tried Quint yet. With TLA Plus, we were having like sort of this concern, but with TLA Plus, we realized this pretty fast. And then this was more something like we were writing almost like as a kind of backend implementation. But what people were seeing was sort of like this non-trivial traces they can run against their code base to sort of see if there might be issues there. In almost all projects, we try to use this methodology. We were able to find like non-trivial, I would say like critical issues. The depth of the scenarios, that's sort of what is interesting, goes up to like 20. And so that's something which is like, I think it's sort of hard to argue against because it's very hard for a developer to manually create test scenarios which are kind of so deep. That's really like the power of tools or power of like computer assisting us thinking about security, where we can declaratively say like what should hold, and you allow tools to explore the space. As a developer, we are having like, we are biased. And so we normally are having like a picture of the world. And normally when we test stuff, we are, we are constrained. You're always like are making some assumptions implicitly. With these tools, you cannot make implicit assumptions. That's the beauty. It forces you to say even obvious things like, I should always be able to reach this state. If you say like declaratively with Quint or TLA Plus, I should always reach this state, then the Apalache can generate like a bunch of test scenarios which you can run against your code to see like, even like sometimes knowledge checker says like, you cannot, because this is, in this case, we're not able to reach. This is counterexample. And so that's the beauty of the stuff. And even like, no matter how confident we are in domain and how confident we are in a code base, it is very easy considering, complexity, or just like we are humans, as you said at the beginning, to make mistake. And these tools are here not to replace us, but to actually assist people in like hopefully doing their job with more fun and like faster and in a more than, safe and correct way.
Before we move to the other stuff that you wanted to mention, I do have one more question. But before even that, I'm just going to say something that I would never say 2 years ago, but this is compliment to all the listeners out there. Really, I know there is development teams that develop on top of Cosmos that listen to this podcast. I know that. So that would be a call to action, guys. If you are out there still working on a project, go to Informal, talk with the guys. It's not very hard to find them. If you're struggling, go to the description of the episode. And I know for sure, I know it's kind of sounds big-headed, but I have had teams before come to me and say, hey, we listened to this and then decided to, for example, Stride is one. I'm really proud of that. They told me about that. So if there is other teams like that, guys, go and collaborate, because this will definitely help not just you, but I think the whole ecosystem. One last question about Quint before we move on to the other stuff. Can Quint cooperate with COSM WASM or?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Quint is like a language agnostic. And so we on purpose, like, there was a lot of push to do the stuff which are like language specific. Like that's sort of like the signal we're getting like very consistently from all developers. They are writing tests in the same programming language they write the system. And like ideally, you would just add some kind of library or support there. However, like the problem with that approach is that it's really hard to do the stuff on the model checking side. We need something more scoped and constrained. And also, like if you think in general about like the semantics, capturing semantics at that like low level is probably not like the best idea. But like we are working like, and that's something I also wanted to mention, that like we don't want like to have specification, even if they're executable, and implementation isolated from each other. That's something like which was it was clear for us like from the beginning that doesn't make sense to separate the two. They need to coexist with each other and be in love and be maintained, in sync. That's why we were having a parallel track with model-based testing tools. And this is also something we also made a release towards the end of the last year, the model-based testing tool called Atomcraft. And Atomcraft, I don't know, maybe you heard for it. So Atomcraft essentially allows you to take the abstract test scenario, which is generated from the spec using Appalachi, and then you have a way to spawn a testnet and then execute the scenarios against the real chain code, either over RPC or CLI. And that's something which is currently the way we are interfacing with the code. But that's the level at which we believe it's important to integrate in the language specific or framework specific stuff. And sort of that's where we hope to invest and work with teams who has interest to collaborate with us on this to make the language or framework specific integration points. And Cosmosm is one of the frameworks which is on that list. So we're doing something internally like an Atomcraft for Cosmosm. There is already a version, but we were trying to improve the stuff and showcase it on an example smart contract, which actually provided to us by Confio. So it should be a good representative.
They know their smart contracts, hopefully. Sorry. You mentioned that there are some more stuff that you guys have been working on and that you wanted to announce. I would be happy to hear that.
Yeah, so the second, I would say, the big things is that during the course of the last year, Informal has become steward of the consensus engine, Tendermint core. And before Informal, it was taken care of by IG for a period of time. And I am taking this opportunity to thank everyone who was working hard on the project. And so since 2019 or 2020, when Informal was created, we were always around the consensus engine. We were involved in some protocol design work. We were trying to also contribute on implementation side sporadically, but we were not really deeply involved with the project. And since last year, this has changed. And now we are the main steward of the project. There is a completely new team. And I need to say, it's of course, I don't know, if I can be objective here, but it's really very, very strong team. We have a very strong leadership in that team. It is really a group of people who are super motivated, have a very clear vision how to evolve the project into really, state of the art consensus engine. A lot of people in that group have a formal training in, state machine application. And so they know the academic side. They also have a very strong industrial and engineering experience. So it's really amazing mix of people. And so sort of we're transitioning into a new generation of the consensus engine. The world has changed. So the project was existing for years, but fundamentally there haven't been a major changes in the code base and also in the consensus protocol, if you want, since creation. So between 2016 and 2022, essentially we can say that it was more in a kind of maintenance mode. There was continuous try to improve the stability and performance, but there was no a major change in the way, what the framework offers. And last year, after a long time and a long period of research, there is one big change. It's as probably people know, in Tendermint, there is application blockchain interface, which separates consensus engine from the application. And this is something which was from the beginning, very appealing feature of the framework, as it allows applications to be written in different languages and not sort of delegate low level implementation details to consensus engine. And last year, after as I said, a long time of research and development, we had finally reached the point that there is a new version of ABCI, which is called ABCI++, and which essentially changed pretty significantly the way application and consensus engines can interact with each other. And so this is a major change in the way also application developer will be like thinking about like building blockchains on top of consensus engine, and it opens like a lot of new interesting use cases. So that's just like a first step. The team wants to also address the needs of the, like the world has changed. We have like many new projects which comes with like with different needs and different requirements. And what we want to offer is like more modular stack which allow more experimentation. We want to innovate both within a team, but also allow people to innovate in a safe way on the consensus core, on the like mempool, on the RPC level, on the gossip level. So now the team is essentially having like a two major responsibility of like improving QA processes. And that was already like something, I would say, the major improvement in the last release. There's a very clear, and I invite everyone to take a look at the QA process in the repo. There is essentially very sort of clear expectation in terms of like what the release should satisfy, and we'll continue to invest like strongly in QA. And the second thing is really cleaning up the internal interfaces so people can more easily experiment and like replace or swap like some components. Because right now we still have like plenty of forks, because it's just that's the only way for people to like change the things they need. That's sort of on a technical side. On a more administrative side, there is like the Tendermint brand is owned by All and Bits, and sort of like the All and Bits essentially has a bit different perspective on like where the consensus engine should evolve, or Tendermint how it should evolve. And there is like the Jay the already was for some time maintaining Tendermint 2, so it's a different implementation, the same consensus protocol, but like a slightly different like how to say implementation of it. And based on my discussion with Jay, my feeling is that like he wants to keep the implementation more minimal. So it's like more like a kernel, which is like having like the minimal set of features, and then it's like very solid and like and secure. On our side, we believe that like we need to evolve and we need to better address the needs. We also want to treat IBC and cross-chain as a more like native or first-class citizen in the repo. And Jay decided to essentially archive the existing Tendermint core repository. We're a bit forced to like to fork and rebrand essentially the what was the previously considered as Tendermint core. And that's something which we have like a new name, but we are in the process of essentially doing legal work to properly brand this, and so it will be announced in the hopefully the following days or weeks. But that's more on a kind of administrative side. I want kind of to be positive about this, and I hope that people will be excited about like this. I heard a good joke that in Cosmos everything is decentralized and fault tolerant, and now we are having even like fault tolerant implementation of the consensus engine. So there would be like more teams working on this. But Informal and ICF are committed to still supporting the project, and you will hear about like new name and all the team and everything. We are preparing communication material, so that's sort of like also kind of a big announcement there. So like you should expect some really cool research coming from this team, innovation on the consensus core, innovation on the P2P level, innovation on like testing and QA using of formal verification tools. So yeah, a lot of really exciting stuff there.
To keep up with the Cosmos jokes, I hope that the new consensus engine, let's call it like that, can handle more drama per second, because the drama per second rate in Cosmos is known to be high. You mentioned some of use cases, different use cases, and some of ways to interact that might be different. Can you give me a couple of examples of what you're thinking about?
Sure. So like with the existing ABCI interface, the way consensus engine was interacting with the application was pretty much that once block is formed, it is being like sent to the application in a serialized way, and then application execute this like sequentially. This is how like deterministic execution was taken care of, but application was not having really like a good way to inform what is the content of the block, or to try to do any sort of optimization in parallel with consensus execution. So ABCI++ come with like a slightly different set of API. And so first it allow consensus engine to propose or what we call prepare proposal where the set of transactions from the mempool before being proposed as a candidate in consensus are being pushed to the application. And application has essentially full freedom to like modify, delete, even add transaction. And only then after application essentially respond, the consensus proceeds. And this is being like proposed. On a reception side, before participants vote for a block which is being proposed, they also consult in a process proposal API, they also consult application and give application chance to validate transactions. And then only if like there is sort of everything is fine, we proceed. And so the kind of trivial consequence of this is that you cannot have a block full of crap, which is currently possible, as essentially the original consensus engine care most about like just like that we are agreeing on the same thing consistently. But like how, what we put there, and also like if application wants to reorder stuff, that was not really available. And there was some idea with prioritized mempool to give some flexibility to application, but we never really managed to see this as a kind of interesting and viable option in production. That's sort of like one kind of basic example. The other one is that like instead of serially submitting transaction, there's like a only finalized block now as sort of like the API at the end of consensus execution, where you essentially give a freedom to application to execute transaction potentially in parallel. And this is the part where I was saying that now it's more on developer to be careful, as parallel execution will still need to be deterministic. And now, as also with the prepared proposal, application will be aware of the block candidate, application developer can start optimistic execution in parallel while ordering. And so this will, as in most of the application, to the best of my knowledge, consensus engine is not bottleneck. This will be like super cool because you can sort of like start doing and processing stuff while consensus is progressing. And before a block is finalized, you can already like essentially prepare the new state. And then when you see decision, then you can instantly finalize block. And the last feature, which is experimental feature, is called vote extensions. And this is essentially way for applications to piggyback on pre-commit messages, which are like the last stage of voting the Tendermint consensus, to piggyback application-specific data, which will then also be checked by the application on the reception side. And then only essentially if there is like a 2/3 plus voting power confirming voting this data, which are signed by validator, then this will be passed to the next block as sort of like extra data. And this, for example, makes it possible to have implementation like oracles more natively implemented, or like to do like threshold encryption or decryption, because now you can do like these things natively within the consensus engine.
As a developer, you might hate my summary, but I guess it could be like called as a very in-depth indexing of the data, and that allows, in my opinion, for a lot of things. Flash loans comes to mind, right? A lot of economical possibilities, I think, for DeFi applications. From what you said, I'm pretty sure that it would be possible to achieve. I'm not sure if it's possible to achieve now.
So here it's really like you sort of like give application developer a possibility to get like signals from the consensus engine during the consensus execution. And it really like it's a lot of flexibility. It's also a lot of responsibility on application developers. Yeah. But
Yes.
like I'm sure that there would be like, and this is like, talking with people, with application developer, like everyone is having like a different use case. So it seems really like something needed. Also, request for this change is coming from the community. And I'm sure that like we'll be hearing a lot of really cool use cases enabled by this change, by this new API. Just even like on a more theoretical side, if you look at the state of the art in terms of like state machine application, there is no really any innovation which goes in this direction. Like all existing like approaches are just pretty much like like agreeing on the something and then passing it to the application level. And then you were having some approaches where you could sort of like maybe execute things in parallel, but just really opening the consensus box and allowing like information to flow during execution is something I'm not aware of. And so I think like that, how combining this with like optimistic ordering, with like parallel execution, are even like some stuff which I hope we'll see like some really cool research, like fundamental research, because it has a potential to change the usability and also performance of like state machine replication engines.
That is fascinating. I really also have not heard. I do keep an eye, of course, unlike yourself in depth, but I do keep an eye on those things and try to read some papers that I understand at least in that direction. But I have not really seen anyone working. And I know already, I can already think of teams that I can definitely go to and say, hey guys, you need to listen to this because this might be interesting for what you are building. And especially all the teams that are building even like I said economical stuff, but social stuff, a lot of the social stuff that can really like increase the scalability, I think, of what people are trying to achieve. I know I don't like numbers, and none of us like statistics and numbers and show off things. But there is one question that has been on the mind, I guess, of a lot of people who have kind of got pilled by Tendermint since 2016. And one of them has been the amount of validators that Tendermint can handle. Has that at all is going to be influenced by all those changes, or is that one of the changes, or currently there is something that is still on hold?
That's actually a really good question. So, in principle, on the scalability side of the consensus engine, we haven't really been making significant progress in the previous period. There are some teams outside the core team that were sort of doing some really cool research on that front. And that's one of the things we plan really to like focus, trying to upstream some of this cool research if possible, and also like do internal stuff there. ABCI++ on its own should make things more performant, but in terms of number of validators, I think we need to do more research and also changings also at a different levels of the stack. Right now, the team is focusing on the P2P, peer-to-peer part of the consensus engine, as this was for a long time, the part of the code no one really understand, and everyone was afraid to touch. And there was even internal joke that whoever work on this left abruptly. We really are now trying to address this tech debt and to enable to experiment with new implementations there at the level of the P2P and interaction between P2P and consensus. There is almost no research existing. I was involved in some research where we look at the crash tolerance systems. And so that was to the best of my and our knowledge, that was a first research or paper of that kind, where you try to look at how gossip protocols and peer-to-peer gossip protocols and consensus protocols, how they interplay. Because you have redundancy at both levels, and it's not clear, what is the optimal way of composing the two. And to really make the large scalable instances of these kind of consensus systems, we really need to look carefully at what we are doing at the P2P level, what we do at the gossip level, and what we do at the consensus level, and then how it all interface with applications. Even existing implementation, there are projects which were using it with thousands of validators with still order of seconds latency or finality block time. So I think even existing system is able to be used at a scale. But you were mentioning, this social use cases. That's something which we are at Informal super interested in. I'm sure that Baki was talking about supporting local communities, having use cases which are not just DeFi. For those projects, the existing implementations are probably too expensive. Running the Tendermint full node right now is not cheap. It requires say expensive hardware to run. And if you want to scale this to have a good decentralization, you probably need to have at least tens of validators. And for the small socially impactful project, this might not be feasible. So I think that's something we also need to pay more attention on those use cases. Because if you really want to make impact to the society, we need to allow people to be able to use the stuff in a secure and decentralized way, but still with a reasonable price. And that's one of the big themes the team will be focusing this year. We want to sort of clean up the APIs. We want to make things more modular. Hopefully this will allow us to significantly lower operational costs of Tendermint, and also be able to experiment with making, as I said, new APIs or supporting new use cases, and also making everything much more performant.
Since we last spoke, I think we were just starting to be a validator when we were last speaking. And since then, we haven't grown much as a validator, not because we don't want to, but because, well, it's more about personal values and about what projects I really want to support and as a validator. But one of the main reasons, to be honest, is of course because of those values that I have and because of the amount of work I want to put into the infrastructure I'm holding is the cost of the infrastructure. And for example, I remember, I think I have this other format where we do like live streams with validators to get to know them. And I think it was one node or something like that. And I think it was them. And the guy there, he is actually from the Balkans, if I'm not mistaken, or Romania, or the no, I think it's Romanian. But anyways, and he's also very much like into bare metal and a lot of things. And when he was telling me their Cosmos, I thought I have a complicated Cosmos setup. When he started telling me his Cosmos setup, I was like, oh my God, how much the fuck does that cost? Of course, we didn't talk about the prices, but like just hearing those things, I was like, whoa. And considering all the news now with all the cloud providers, and nobody really wants to be in a cloud provider in the first place, but considering all those news, and looking for data centers, and yeah, those things are really, really, really not cheap. And that is, of course, I mean, on one hand, it's good, but for decentralization and for social purposes, of course, that is not something that is a good thing.
As I mentioned, like one of the projects we are also like bootstrapping right now is like collaborative finance. That's sort of like, or CoFi, that's the code name. And this team, it's like we are lucky to have like a group of really well-known researchers in this economics theory. And also the guys were like having like successful implementations of this idea in like Slovenia and Sardinia, both on credit clearing and mutual credit side. And they are supporting like various like small communities. So there are like communities project which are keen to like using these ideas and these techniques, and they would really like to have them also on chain. But like it's not really clear what is sort of like, can we do this with the existing technology? Because probably the cost would be too high. And so that's sort of, I think, really something to keep in mind. And I hope that like we'll have bandwidth and like chance to improve something on that front.
We haven't mentioned anything on the economical side. Let's leave it for the next time, of course. Well, of course, if you have anything else to add, I'll be happy to hear, and I'm sure everybody else as well. Before that, though, let's do a quick blitz. What are currently, well, at least two or three projects that you are, well, you kind of mentioned already 20 while we were talking, but still, maybe you could, some projects that you think are doing really good work in terms of R&D currently, that you are interested in and that you are inspired by? Could you name a few to share with us a few?
Okay, so I'm really bad with names.
It's okay. It's okay. A lot of people cheat. No, no, I'm joking. No, I'm joking. It's okay.
So on the consensus side, one of the projects we're also looking at is Narwhal Bullshark. So it's a paper and the reference implementation, which I think really clever implementation of like, I would say relatively old ideas of doing like separating like ordering of transactions from like, or like doing pre-ordering of transactions in some form of mempool and then agreeing on IDs. It allows for like high throughput, significantly high throughput implementation. Using DAGs in that context is really neat, and there are really some nice ideas there. And we are also looking at this work. We are also involved in some cool consensus work, which also open. Last time we talked about like consensus design space, and I was saying that it's pretty much like clear what we can do there. I was wrong apparently, and there is still, I would say, room for things to be added there. I cannot say, unfortunately, more about this because things are under submission, as there are some PhD students involved. But as soon as it's ready, I am happy, to talk more about this. It's really cool. There is, for example, Sai has done really cool work on performance improvements. It goes along kind of the same line, like being more careful how like we disseminate block parts and sort of separating like the dissemination of transactions from like order and trying to order just on IDs. So this is on a kind of on consensus side. That's sort of what I see as really cool. Anoma is with Typhoon also doing really cool work. So it's a more research project at a stage. They are like investing, to the best of my knowledge, also a lot in this like gossip layer and like looking at like heterogeneous like gossip networks and how like we can reason and like design protocols in a smart way there. It's also implemented in Rust. And I need to say that, we still have like this kind of hope that there will be at some point in time Rust implementation of consensus engine and that we might be able to contribute to this. So that's sort of on the consensus side. On the formal verification side, is good. Okay, we stop here.
It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good because you can go into more, but it's cool because I'm talking to Chris next week actually, and me and Chris don't aren't actually familiar with each other, but apparently I've been following him and I've heard good stuff from the other side. So and we kind of finally managed to get a recording out. So I'm gonna be recording and then talking to him about Anoma and a lot of the work that they did.
Chris Goes is like one of the most smart and amazing people in the space. So we are really lucky. He's also part of TAB. And so that's probably one of the major achievements of TAB that like we managed to convince Chris to sort of like be somehow formally contributing. I mean, he's of course part of the Cosmos, and but this is like somehow bringing him more close to the core. But yeah, I'm looking forward also like hearing your discussion with Chris.
And I've actually, ironically, I spoke to Dan just a while ago about Say and about who were talking about the performance. It was just as recently. So the frequency is working. It's the same frequency. Wait, there are still two more questions in the Blitz. They're new. They're much quicker. So the second one, give me two things which motivate you in your daily life to, and this is a strange one, I know, but that keep you motivated in your daily life to keep on, researching, building, and changing the world.
Yeah, like I was actually thinking about this like over break because last year was like very challenging and a lot of work and like significant stress with all the work. And I realized that like I'm really lucky being surrounded with like the group of people I'm working with. That was sort of like my dream when I decided to like leave industry in Switzerland, and sort of like I was always like hoping that we can have like a small R&D team where we can work on a cool stuff and being this bridge between the academia and industry. And Informal is not so small, but there are really like some brilliant people, and I really think that we're trying to do things which sort of make sense, and that's sort of what drives me and what keep me essentially motivated to work. So it's really like the people primarily, and then also the ideas or teams on which we are working.
Last one person, dead or alive, doesn't matter. It could be a developer, it could be a writer, it could be an author, it could be a blogger. I don't know. Could not even be a person. It could be a fictional character. Somebody could follow and get inspired by.
Maybe I can mention Fernando Pedone here. So Fernando is a professor at UC Lugano. He's one of the rock star distributed system researcher. And we were lucky to also have him involved with the InstruChain Foundation. So he has also like official role there. And I was also lucky to collaborate with him and do some research together. And so his way of like picking topics and like working with people on this is really something which inspires me. So I kind of encourage everyone to like look at the publications of Fernando's group. They're really like very solid like papers there, and I have some ideas that there might be also some new coming out, which will also be like super cool.
Ta-dam. Cool. Zarko, thank you again very, very, very much. Hopefully next time will not be so far away. Maybe you will come visit islands and we could either do this in person.
Yeah, next time in person.
Yes, it has to be. Thank you very much, Zarko.
Thank you. I was happy as always, being here and talking to you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. This content was created by the Citizen Cosmos Validator. If you enjoyed it, please support us by delegating to Citizen Cosmos and help us to create more educational content.